muted if you're not speaking. To the members of the public who are joining, you will have your webcams and microphones off or muted. If you're phoning in to join the meeting and you choose to speak during the public comments portion of the agenda for privacy concerns, the host will rename you to caller and only show the last 4 digits of your phone. Additionally, let's all remember that the City of Santa Rosa is committed to providing a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption and will not tolerate hateful speech or actions. Everyone is expected to participate fully, or if necessary, we will need to end the meeting immediately. Madam Host, will you please explain how the public comment section of today's meeting will take place?
Thank you, Chair Quant. At each agenda item, the item will be presented. The chair will ask board for comments or questions, and then at the appropriate time, open the floor for public comments. The host will lower all hands until the public comment item is open. Once the chair has called for public comment, the chair will ask the public to raise their virtual hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. Those joining by phone may dial *9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on those who've raised their hands. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes and a courtesy timer will appear on the screen. Email public comments received by the deadline have been distributed to the Board of Community Service members and uploaded to the agenda prior to the start of today's meeting. Emails received will not be read into the record.
Thank you, Shelley. And with that, I call this December 8, 2021 meeting of the Board of Community Services to order at 4:14 in the afternoon. Pursuant to Government Code 54953E and the recommendation of the Health Officer of the County of Sonoma, this Board of Community Service member meeting will be held in a virtual Zoom fashion in a Zoom webinar. Board members and staff are participating from remote locations and practicing appropriate social distancing. Members of the public may view and listen to the meeting as noted on the city's website and on the agenda. And with that, Madam Host, may we have a roll call? Remember to unmute when you give your present note.
Thank you. Please respond when I call your name. Chair Kwan.
Here.
Vice Chair Griffin.
Here.
Member Boccaleone.
Here.
Board Member Cruz.
Present.
Board Member Pitts.
Yes.
Board Member Spillman.
Here.
Board Member Spence. Let the record reflect that all board members are present with the exception of Carolina Spence.
Thank you, Shelley. With that, I would like to open the floor for public comments on non-agenda items. Do we know if there is anyone at this time who would like to address the board on members that are not on the agenda but are within the subject matter of the jurisdiction of the Board of Community Services? Do we have any public comment items for number 3?
There are no hands raised at this time.
Thank you, Shelley. So with that, we are going to move on to item 4, which is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting, which was way back on October 27th. Are there any edits or corrections that need to be made? If so, raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, I will assume that we can go ahead and approve those minutes as submitted. With that, we're going to move on to item number 5, which is upcoming events and reports on accomplished events. And I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Director Jen Santos for her reports. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Chair Quant. Hello, members of the Board of Community Services. I have a few, you have your upcoming events and accomplishments as part of your agenda packet, but I'm just going to highlight a few things. Just a reminder that we are actively seeking those who are interested in garden plots at Finale Park. It's a beautiful community garden. So if you know anyone interested in having a community garden plot there, we have that available. That's for upcoming events, as well as just a little nod that we have our first in a series of public meetings for the Fremont Neighborhood Park next Wednesday at 5:30. And we'll send you out a little reminder to join that meeting if you'd like to. Just make sure you're checking in with the recording secretary so we don't form a quorum at the Fremont meeting. But otherwise, I encourage you to get in touch with that meeting or the neighbors. And for accomplishments, we are super excited to announce that our holiday craft fair was a huge success, even though we have a pandemic. It was just slightly, looks like about 100 people less than previous years. So we are doing pretty good with that. We did, 2020 was canceled, but we're looking back at previous numbers. And then, so we had about, let's see, next page, we had about 2,500 or something, 2,500 in attendance. Sorry, I lost my little note at that, which is fantastic. And our prize table earned about a little over $2,000. And that raises money for our scholarship fund. And we give a lot of those out for families who need swim lessons and summer camp assistance. So it's really exciting. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Jen. Do you want to roll right into director updates?
Of course, thank you. So I've got a few updates today. First of all, welcome board member Boccolione. Super excited to have you here and join us and be a member of the Board of Community Service. And also letting the board know, you probably are aware of this, we have a new city manager starting in January, hopefully on January 3rd. I'm probably not going to say her name right, but Marikeshia Smith is how I've heard it pronounced. Starting in January, hopefully January 3rd. She has about 21 years of governmental experience, most recently as the deputy city manager for the city of Stockton. And prior to that with the city of Oakland, and also with the public works, as the public works director for the city of Cincinnati, which I can imagine is a pretty big role. She has a really esteemed track record of public service and acknowledgements that I won't go through, but we're really looking forward to meeting her and informing her of what we do here in recreation and parks. Also at council last night, the council members elected Councilmember Alvarez as the new vice mayor for the city council. So congratulations to Councilmember Alvarez. And more locally here for our parks planning team, Scott Wilkinson joined our team as our new parks planner here. We're super excited to have a park planner on the team after 13 years of really not having a full-time park planner. He'll join Emily Ander and Tim Bernard as one of our park planners, and it's a management position, and we're super excited to have Scott on board, and I'm sure he'll be bringing things to you in the future. We also wanted to give you a little bit of update of what's happening with pickleball since the Board of Community Services approved the double lining of the pickleball courts. The pickleball team has already raised the funds necessary to buy the nets that they need, the portable nets that they'll need for future games. We have unfortunately also received several rounds of vandalism on the courts themselves, with something greasy being dumped just at the play line where pickleball players would stand to go back and forth to play pickleball. And thanks to our amazing maintenance team, though, that those areas are cleaned up, and my understanding is they are ready to be, can be played on now, which is exciting. The police have been notified, of course, of the vandalism, and they are monitoring the situation and they have their investigation going on. And we are also lining up to work with the tennis players as well as the pickleball players to discuss the colors of the double lining and talk about sharing the courts in a mutual way. And from a timing perspective, it looks like we just need some fair weather. So right now we're giving like the worst case scenario that spring would be the first time we can double line the courts. So that we have that warm weather available, but if there's a pocket of warm weather in there and we have the staff available, we'll move forward with the double lining at that time. But right now it's looking like spring for the double lining. So that's what's happening there. And we'll continue to monitor it and bring you updates as we move forward. And that is the end of my update.
Thanks, Jen. Without getting into lengthy discussion about anything that Jen just asked, since those are not on our agenda, does anyone have any follow-up questions or comments on either the accomplished events or the director updates? You could raise a real hand or a virtual hand. Logan.
I'll raise both. Yeah, just want to let you know, Jen, that the mayor and I stopped by the holiday fair and it was great. Got some gifts for the family and some delicious cookies.
I'm so glad to hear. It's a fantastic event. It's so exciting. I'm so glad it's back. And that's great to hear. Wonderful.
Yep. Thank you.
I was also able to go and it covered the entire Finley Center. Once again, I was lost in a maze of just incredible stuff and was able to pick up some stocking stuffers. Terry.
Thank you. On that same topic, Jen, I was just curious whether you had a similar number of vendors this year. It seemed like there were more to me, but maybe it was just the way it was laid out, but it seemed like there were more vendors this year. Do you know?
I'm going to pass that on to our Deputy Director for Recreation, Jeff.
I had a feeling, so I turned the camera on. We were actually, right about the same. We were slightly less, but we made some changes for COVID safety. So we did not have the food there. We didn't have the live entertainment to try to discourage kind of hanging out in a gathering event, make it more of a walking through event. So that did free up some space where we moved vendors to rooms that we normally don't use, which also helped with crowding and some of that stuff. So it was spread out a little bigger than it's been in past, but I think we were at full capacity, and then we made the decision if anyone dropped out, normally we would fill those spots for vendors. And this year we decided not to do that. So I think we had 2 less than we would normally have because 2 people dropped out that we didn't fill.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I stopped by Finley Center today and picked up my new and improved binder. And while I was there, ran into Kim Hatch, and I commented on how wonderful I thought all of the banners that were up in the hallways were. And she let me know that they were left over from last year's canceled event, that they were tucked away and repurposed. So it's good to see City Park and Rec once again thinking on their feet and repurposing as they go. Any more comments? Seeing none, we will move on to our first agenda item, which is a presentation on the neighborhood services programs. And with that, I would like to introduce Joanna Moore.
Hello. I'm going to go ahead and wait for the PowerPoint to come up. All right, so my name is Joanna Moore, and I'm a recreation coordinator with Neighborhood Services, and thank you for having me here with you today. This presentation is going to go over all the different programs that we offer throughout the year. Next slide. Neighborhood Services, funded by Measure O, provides targeted services to youth and to residents who need them most at little to no cost. Recreation and academic support opportunities at the neighborhood level are key to development and well-being. Our mission is to provide youth with early prevention services. We do this by casting a large safety net in Santa Rosa and by providing programs such as our after-school programs, camps, family events, sports clinics, and specialty workshops. Running a wide variety of programs allows us to reach thousands of Santa Rosa youth and families. Next slide. So our after-school programs, they take place 10 months out of the year. So pretty much whenever school's in session, we're running our after-school programs. And we partner with Burbank Housing with our after-school programs. And this is a great partnership for a couple of reasons. One, we run our program within the community. So we are automatically reaching our target population, and they already qualify for our programs just by living in the Burbank housing community. This does not mean that other people, anybody in Santa Rosa can join these programs. They just actually take place at the Burbank housing community. And the second reason is we get to be on their in their community, and we get to utilize their community rooms, their play structures, their basketball courts, and some have like really nice large green fields for the children to play around in. So it's a really great partnership. So we're at 6 Burbank housing locations, including Apple Valley, which we own the building there. Then this year, we also started our pilot kindergarten program. And this is a kindergarten, transitional kindergarten program. So transitional kindergarten is for children who are not quite old enough for kindergarten, but are too old for preschool. So elementary schools now have transitional kindergarten on campus. And we noticed that there was a gap in services for this age group. There are a lot of different after-school programs that are on campus, but they don't start serving children until they're in first grade. So we thought that we would start a program serving this population that wasn't served. So we are doing this here at our Steel Lane Community Center, and it's been really successful so far. We have 24 students with us, and we're able to work really closely with the teachers and kind of piggyback off of their curriculum and make sure that we're starting these students off on a really good academic journey with a lot of support. At each location, we serve about 10 to 20 youth, depending on the size of the space because of COVID. So we kind of go in, kind of evaluate the space, and we can figure out how many youth we can serve at each facility. Next slide. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at our after-school program. Our program has a lot of structure. We feel like the kids are most successful with a lot of structure. So every day we have an agenda and activities planned out for them. One of the main things that we do focus on is our homework support. A lot of the families and the students that we serve, English is a second language, so it's really important for them to get that one-on-one support with our staff. We also do a lot of arts and craft, recreational sports, and some STEM programming. And if you look at our picture here, if you look at our monthly, we do themes and a life skill of the month. So our life skill of the month was courtesy manners, and our activity was welcome to our beehive and be polite project. And you can see one of our students here wrote be a helpful friend and be respectful and kind. Next slide. So we offer camps pretty much whenever school's not in session, we're offering camps. So we have a fall break camp, winter break camp, spring break camp, and summer camps. This past year, we were doing, since we weren't able to get onto the schools yet, we were able to run program out of our Finley Community Center, our Steel Lane Community Center, and our Church of One Tree at Julia Park. This year, we're super hopeful that we'll be able to get back on campus for our Recreation Sensation, which is one of our most popular camps. We serve about 120 students per camp, and we usually run between 4 to 6 recreation sensations throughout the summer. They're about 6 to 7 weeks long, and we work with Santa Rosa City Schools, Bellevue School District, and the Roseland School District. Next slide. So we're going to look a little bit closer at our camps too. We offer an academics section with our camp, arts and crafts, recreation and sports. But one of my favorite things that we offer is our clubs. And the reason why I like our clubs is because the student and the staff get to pick something to participate in that they're a little bit more interested in. So this past summer, we were able to do a yoga club, gardening, fine art, and a nature club. And if you look really closely at that nature picture, you can see a butterfly in that cage. And those participants just watched that butterfly come out of the cocoon. Next slide. So every year, or pre-COVID, we did one of our most popular programs that we do is the sports program. And we do junior warriors, junior giants, and we coordinate, we make teams and they play against each other, and it's very popular. But with COVID and all the protocols we had to follow, that's not something that we could do this year. So our staff kind of started thinking outside the box, and we decided to do sports clinics. And our sports clinics were really successful. So over the past 4 months, we've been able to serve 195 youth in these sports clinics. And these clinics take place at our Steel Lane Community Center and Comstock Middle School. And we're doing a soccer clinic and a basketball clinic. And, we have kids that can enroll in these courses. They get to socialize, hang out, and they also get to play, learn a new sport or continue to play a sport that they really have enjoyed in the past. Next slide. So I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge our staff. On payroll during the school year, we have about 35 to 45 staff to run all of our program. And in the summer, we have between 50 and 60 staff on payroll. They really are the glue to our program, and we value our staff quite a bit. We offer training for our staff year round. We do in-service training, orientations. We do meetings on a regular basis to make sure that our staff has all the correct tools to be successful. Another thing that's really unique about our programs is we have staff that have participated in our program as participants, youth, and then they become volunteers, and then they'll become staff members. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Jeremiah Cano. He's going to talk about his neighborhood services experience. He was he was a student with us, and then a volunteer, and then now he's a staff member in a leadership role. Take it away, Jeremiah.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me here. This is a really cool opportunity. So my name is Jeremiah Cano. I am currently here, an employee. I am working the kindergarten program. I am lead staff here, and it has been quite a journey. I've been having so much fun with these kids. But I'm here because I just wanted to share why I think that being in this leadership role can not only be so impactful on the youth individually, but also leave a positive mark on the community as a whole growing here. And I'm just gonna share that by sharing my own little story of coming to this program as a youth. So in about elementary school, I would come and I would do sports clinics. So I would participate in the basketball training program. Now, me, myself, I really didn't want to do it. My mother actually told me to do it and kind of forced me to do it at first. So I wasn't really leaning into the programs. I wasn't really having it. I didn't really want to be there at all. But once I started going to program, I started waking up, having to do it after school, getting a routine, and I started meeting the staff and the other kids there. It didn't feel so much as where I was at school and I had tasks to do, such as classwork or something that I didn't want to do. It was more that they wanted me to be there. These staff were very welcoming to all the kids. I made a lot of friends. It was something that I really didn't experience before growing up where I was growing up. And it really did change my outlook on a lot of things, meeting all these people with such positive attitudes that were just bringing me in and telling me that I could do all these things. And like I said, doing these basketball clinics, I wasn't very athletic or socially motivated, but meeting all these people who were very welcoming, very nice, very kind, very respectful towards me, very, what's the word? Motivating. It was something that stayed with me for a very long time. And then growing up, I decided to volunteer for the programs. And it turns out that that little boy, me, who was motivated, is the same as another little boy or another little girl that I met during the programs volunteering. And I thought to myself, wow, not only did I feel this way, but I can make others feel this way too. And that was something that really changed my outlook on a lot of things in life. I started to believe that I not only could do things for myself and hold the confidence to carry me to new heights, but I could tell these other people, these other youth, not only the youth, but my staff, my employees, my coworkers as well, that we're here for each other, we're here for the community, and we have each other's backs. And that was something that really stuck with me for the rest of my life till now. And because of that, I went from a kid who didn't really want to be in school, didn't like sports, didn't like to get out of the house, to a kid who went to high school, joined cross country, track and field, was an all year round athlete. We actually qualified for state all 4 years. I just got into the junior college recently. I graduated. Unfortunately, due to COVID events, I wasn't allowed to participate in sports my first year, but my first year cross country coming back into college, we actually qualified for state again. So that was really cool. And although there are other things in my life that definitely helped me to reach where I am, I think that this program, these opportunities that were given to me through the neighborhood services was definitely what told me the most that I could do what I want if I just have the confidence to be a leader, tell myself I can do these things and work as a team, because teamwork makes the dream work. And yeah, I'm super happy to be here. I just recently worked my first position as an assistant director in the summer, and then in this past fall was a director, and it was really fun. So I look forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah, for sharing. Okay, next slide. So prior to COVID, we do a lot of our year-round events, and these events are really important. We like to put things on for our families where they can come out and do something all together. So we have our Splash Bash, our Halloween Bash, Sweetheart Dance, and Spring Fest. And it's been a little bit challenging for us to put these on just because of COVID, but this year we got creative and thought outside the box. And next slide. We were able to put on our Halloween event. It's not what we're used to, but it actually turned out really well. This was our trunk or treat event. We had all of our staff and members of the community come out and decorate their cars and dress up in costumes. We had over 100 families come out, and approximately 250 people joined us that day to trick or treat around the Finley parking lot. Another great thing about this event is that we were able to work with some of our community partners, some local nonprofits, so our families also benefited from getting some of the resources at their table. So this was just like a really fun event. We were really lucky. I know most of these pictures, you can see the gray clouds in the background. It rained before the event and after the event, but during the event, it was dry. So we were good. Next slide. So the last thing I wanted to touch upon is that because of COVID, we really have had to think outside the box. And because of that, we have started some new programs. And one that I really wanted to highlight was our dance program. Typically, we do a cheer program that cheers for the sports programs. When we do basketball, we have their teams, and then on Saturday, the teams play each other, and our cheerleaders cheer during these games. But since we couldn't do that, we did a dance program, and this program was extremely successful. We had a lot of participants in the program, and then they actually, over a short amount of time, were able to create several dances and put on an amazing dance show at our Finley Community Center. It was really great to see all of our participants up on the stage, and it was also really great to see all their families in the audience smiling and cheering them on. Next slide. Oh, and that's all. So if anybody has any questions.
Raise your virtual or real hand if you have any questions or comments for either Joanna, or I'm not sure if Jeremiah is still with us or not. Terry.
Thank you. And thank you, Joanna. And thank you, Jeremiah, for sharing your story. Joanna, you touched on this, but for the benefit of our newer members, can you talk a little bit more about Measure O and the funding for these programs and how that all works?
Sure. I'm actually going to pass this over to Jeff to take this question, just because I don't want to.
Sure. So Measure O was passed in 2004 in Santa Rosa. It's a quarter-cent sales tax. And there is money, 40% goes to police, 40% goes to fire, and 20% goes to the Violence Prevention Partnership. Part of that goes to recreation for the Neighborhood Services Division, and part of that is handled by the Violence Prevention Partnership, doing grants to other community organizations that provide services for underserved youth in the community. So neighborhood services programs are one of those functions that offer that programming. It's recreation programming that we have offered historically, but so Joanna mentioned like summer camps. We have our summer camp model, the recreation sensation. It's similar programming, just with a slightly different lens and focus. So one good example where our traditional summer camps is you sign up for a week and it's that summer camp experience. And yeah, a lot of people sign up for multiple weeks. Recreation sensation, it's really an emphasis on developing 40 developmental assets in youth. And so the positive role models, the after school programs, those types of things. So it's certainly about building, and Jeremiah did a much better job than I think any of us could do in kind of describing what that is building that relationship with our youth, giving them positive role models, and helping them grow up and have high expectations for themselves, develop confidence, those types of things. So did that touch on what you were looking for, Terry, or any?
Yeah,
any
thank you. It did. And is the sales tax measure still set to expire in 2025?
It is, and currently looking at how to go about looking at a strategy for how we might extend that on a future ballot measure.
Okay, great. I look forward to having those conversations as well, as I feel these programs are just so vitally important to our community, as you can see, as Jeremiah has so perfectly demonstrated. So thank you for that overview. It's helpful.
The current strategy in early stages of developing, but there's been some outreach and stuff and some polling about it, is to look to try to get it on the 2022 ballot.
Okay.
Which would not then make it either, if it didn't pass in 2022, the current ballot would still run through 2024, but it just strategically gives us a little bit more time to gauge what the community is looking for in a possible extension.
Okay, great. Thank you.
On that note, I can tell you the Measure M Oversight Committee is always well represented at the mayor's lunch, and not a month goes by without the member of the Measure O Oversight Committee making specific inquiries about the recreation program, how the kids are being served by this, that it is probably the most important component of this as far as the oversight board mentions. I know the other stuff is important, but the kids are very important to the overseers, and it's a joy that we get to see the good things that happen. Any other, Jeff, did you want to say something?
Real quick, I was just going to comment to that. We did give our budget update presentation to the Oversight Committee last month, and we will be giving that presentation next week at the council meeting for City Council.
Any other questions from the board for item 7.1, the Neighborhood Services Program? Do we have any public comments on this item?
We had one hand. Annette, if you'd like to speak, I will unmute you. Annette, are you still interested in commenting? Okay, I'm not seeing a raised hand.
So with that,
there it goes. Wait, she's raised her hand. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
We can hear
Okay,
you.
yes, we've asked you to. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to find out how would, as kids in my neighborhood, I represent the South Park neighborhood, which is an underserved neighborhood. How would kids in our neighborhood get to be part of any of these programs?
So if you go on our website, everything that we offer is on our website. You can also call us here in the office, and I can, or email us as well. To be a part of this program, you need to qualify. So there's some qualifying factors, but which is also all on our website.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Seeing no other speakers or hands, we will move on to item 7.2. And this item will probably, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, the system-wide parks condition assessment. This is something that we're going to be asked to weigh in on. So it's very important stuff. Jen, do you think this is maybe an hour, less than an hour? What do you think?
Depending on how much public comment we receive, less than an hour for sure.
So we've been running long the last couple of meetings. I don't know if anyone noticed. We should be out of here by 6. Does anyone need to take a 3 to 5 minute break before this presentation, or are we good just to roll right into it? I don't see any sense of urgency from the board, so let's proceed with item 7.2. Emily and Grant, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Quant, Vice Chair Griffin, and members of the board. My name is Emily Ander, and I'm Park Planner Assistant. I'm so excited to come before you today to formally introduce what we're calling the System-Wide Parks Prioritization Project. This project is made up of a system-wide, so across the city's park system, assessing the condition of all the parks, as well as a deferred maintenance analysis and a project prioritization. Tonight's presentation will specifically focus on the condition assessment and analysis, because that's where we are in the project. And what is exciting about the project is that it's given the city the opportunity to hire a third party to look at the current conditions of all of its parks in a holistic and objective way, and to come up with a ranking system to be able to compare the condition of all the parks to determine which are in the best shape and which really need our attention. So that will help staff to prioritize our work and funding to go along with that work. And it's also a unique project because the city hasn't done anything like this before. Staff has an idea of how the public uses the parks and what the condition of the parks are. But to have a third party come in and tell us from their perspective what things are like is really useful and unique. The project team includes city staff from recreation, parks maintenance, park planning, and facilities planning, as well as the consultant team from Calendar and Associates, which is the project manager is Grant Huang, Brian Fletcher is the principal in charge, and Kelly Kong. The project kicked off in March, and the project team has met 6 times since then to create and discuss and refine the park system ranking criteria. Today, Grant will introduce the project to you in more detail, as well as the process that the project team has taken to develop a ranking system to objectively evaluate the condition of our parks. Please keep in mind as you're listening to the presentation that what the project team needs from you are your thoughts and feedback on the ranking criteria. We want to hear specific refinements you would suggest, as well as broad feedback on the process that we're talking about today. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Fletcher. He will be participating in the Q&A at the end. And then I'll turn it over to Grant, who's the project manager, and will be giving the presentation.
Thanks so much, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. As Emily said, my name's Grant Huang. I'm joined with Brian Fletcher. We're with Calendar Associates. We're the design consultants working with Emily and city staff on this project. So we're really excited to present this project to you today. This is one of two presentations we'll be coming to you with, as we're at a point in the project where it's really a perfect time to introduce this project to you, as well as to get your feedback and just to be able to incorporate your input as we proceed with developing the report. So on the first slide, we have our current report title, which is System-Wide Parks Prioritization Report. And full disclosure, it's something we're still brainstorming and refining. This project is really quite unique in terms of the content. So we want to establish a title that captures all the different components. So System-Wide helps communicate that this is a holistic study of the city's park system. And prioritization is really the final goal of the report. We are assessing the parks with the intent to prioritize the parks with the greatest needs. Next slide, please. So the overall agenda for the presentation today is to provide you an introduction and overview of the project up to this point, and to receive feedback from the board on our process and the content we've created so far. So I'll be providing a bit of background on where the project came from. I'll talk about the goals and objectives, as well as the team that has been contributing to this project. I'll then jump into our process and how we gathered the data, as well as the ranking criteria we came up with. And finally, we'll share an example of this ranking system actually applied at one of the parks. Next slide. So our primary goal for this report is to provide a ranking of all the existing parks in the city, as well as a selection of roadways, in order to prioritize the allocation of funding for park improvements. So essentially, when the city has funds made available for park improvements, this report is going to offer them a concise understanding of which parks are in most need and should be prioritized to receive that funding. So I want to provide you a bit of background and context as why that goal is important. In the recent past, the city has recognized that there are a substantial number of deferred maintenance projects across the park system. So these parks are in need of improvement in order to bring them up to a standard that provides value to the community. In light of that, there has been funding sources, including the Measure M Parks for All funds, that have become available to address these needs. The city has conducted community outreach and has gathered a lot of valuable input from the public on how to best use this funding. So by meeting this goal, this report will become a tool for the city to help make decisions on which parks are most in need of improvements, as well as how the funding should be distributed. Next slide, please. So this is an overview of our project team. On the left-hand side from the city, you can see there are a number of different team members that we've been working with together within the city. Just reflects the type of input we've been able to receive as different teams and departments are able to provide their perspectives. The community members are a part of this contributing team due to the input they provided during the Measure M outreach that was conducted by the city. We were able to integrate the results of those surveys in our process to determine the priority ranking. Of course, we will be receiving feedback from the Board of Community Services based on our meeting today and be able to incorporate the support and input you provide. And finally, Calendar Associates is the design consultant represented by me and our primary team members. Next slide, please. So outlined on this slide is our process to develop the report. We've first identified a list of parks and the type of park components that will be assessed. We've then developed a ranking criteria and how these parks will be ranked. So we've gone about visiting a number of sample sites and tested and refined the ranking criteria. Right now, currently, we are now introducing the project to the board for feedback. And in our project process, we're actually in the middle of step number 5, where we visited all the parks and are undergoing the ranking process for the parks, which I just think is a great time to share this project with you today, since the details of our process have been established and we're just welcoming your input before we finalize the park ranking. And then we're going to move on to preparing a draft report, which we will then come back to the board with before presenting it to council. Next slide, please. So how are we assigning a numeric ranking to each park, and what criteria is this going to be based on? So on the slide, you see 6 categories of information that we are using to evaluate the parks. On the left-hand side under priority ranking, our 4 categories will be used to give the park a ranking. So these 4 categories include the condition of the park, the revenue generation, the community priorities, as well as accessibility. On the right-hand side are supplemental categories. So these 2 categories are valuable information for the city to use as a planning tool, and those include lifespan and cost estimate. Next slide, please. So part of this project also includes evaluating a select number of roadway medians and frontages. This won't be an exhaustive assessment like we're doing with the parks, but it will provide the city with a sampling of the various conditions found across the city. So you'll notice in the priority ranking that 3 of the original categories are missing. So it's simply because roadways, they don't have existing ADA reports, they don't generate revenue, and there isn't varying input from the community. So the ranking of the roadways will be exclusively based on condition. Next slide, please. So this is a breakdown of how parks in each of these categories are ranked. We are using a numeric ranking system with a scale from 1 to 5 for each category. 1 represents the highest priority and 5 being the lowest priority. So for an example, a park with a low ranking would be of high priority in terms of its need for improvements. It would have amenities in poor condition. It would have various accessibility deficiencies. It could include amenities that are prioritized by the community and would generally have a high revenue generation. So I'll be jumping into a little bit more details for each of these categories. Next slide, please. So the first one is condition. A really substantial part of developing this report and the ranking process is focused on the existing condition of the parks and roadways. So I do want to spend a little bit more time focusing on our process and efforts regarding condition. Our general process for assessing the condition was to develop a list of amenities and assets, and then develop a rating criteria for how these amenities will be assigned a ranking number. We then visited a sampling of parks to test the criteria. We brought it back to the city, we made refinements, and then carried out site investigations for each park and roadway on our list. Next slide. So I do want to define some terminology that we use throughout the report. An amenity is an attribute of a park that has a designated use. So on the slide, playground and tennis courts are examples of amenities of parks. An asset is a specific component or part that make up a park amenity. So the assets of a playground would include the play equipment, it would include the play surfacing or sand surfacing, or the perimeter fence of the play area. Some examples of assets for tennis courts would be the sports courts lighting, the sports equipment, some adjacent furnishings, and the court surfacing. Next slide. So one of our main objectives was to ensure that our process was kept objective. And we were able to do this by outlining specific criteria for each amenity on how they would be ranked in order to justify why that ranking was assigned to it. So we would evaluate the asset on site. We would review our criteria list to see which ranking description was most accurate, and then we'd assign that number to it on our checklist. Next slide. So here on the screen, I have some example photos we took on site to give you a picture of the various conditions we're able to observe across the park system. So I won't go into each specific column, but you can see on the left-hand side under surfacing, for example, the asphalt that was ranked number 5 is nearly new condition. And as you descend lower, you'll notice cracking and patching, some significant lifting and undulations. And in the bottom left-hand picture, there are craters and a level of deterioration in the asphalt that we would determine to be unsafe. So you'll notice a similar trend to how we rated all these amenities across the board. Next slide. The next category I want to discuss is accessibility. So there's a standard established by the Department of Justice for accessible design. And so there are elements of existing facilities that might not meet this standard. And this often occurs when older facilities were designed and installed prior to some of these standards being established. So the way we evaluated the level of accessibilities of the parks was based on existing reports provided by the city. So these reports were developed, one in 2013 and the other in 2016, and they identified ADA deficient elements across the park system. So during our site investigations, we verified whether or not these deficiencies outlined by the reports have been addressed or if they're still present. We then created a criteria for how these different ADA deficiencies would be numerically ranked in our 1 through 5 system. So 5 would be completely safe and accessible, which would mean that the report didn't flag any accessibility deficiencies for this amenity. And 1 on the flip side would mean the deficiency that was identified as a major issue and could potentially be a hazardous risk to park users. Next slide. So these are a couple examples of that ranking system based on the items identified by the ADA report. So a park amenity will be ranked 5 if there were no identified items based on the report. An example of a non-compliant park feature you see in the center there would be furnishings that don't have the minimum number of required companion seating. So this gets a rank number 3 because it isn't compliant with the accessibility standards, but it's not necessarily a potentially hazardous element. And then number 1 would be an example of a crosswalk without truncated domes. So this would start to pose a safety concern to those using the crosswalk. Next slide, please. Our next category is revenue generation. Now, we are using this as a category, not primarily to value each park based on the amount of revenue it generates, but instead to gauge the amount of use that the park is getting. So revenue generation typically comes from parks with example amenities like reservable picnic tables or program sports elements. And it provides us an understanding of how frequently and at what magnitude the site is being used. So the city was able to provide data collected in 2019 that specified how much revenue each park produced and what amenities within the park was generating that revenue. We then compared the parks and amenities with each other and were able to assign a ranking based on how much revenue was generated. So we put it in our 1 through 5 ranking system, and the highest revenue generating park was attributed to Doyle Park, and the highest earning amenity was attributed to the ball fields at Northwest Community Park. Next slide, please. Our next category is community priorities. So for community priorities, the city has already done extensive outreach for Measure M Parks for All to determine what the priorities of the community are to help understand how best to use the Measure M funds. If we go to the next slide, these are some examples of the survey results taken from the Measure M outreach effort. So as we evaluated the results, we were able to determine what the community really valued most and what items were perceived as more secondary. Next slide, please. So very similar to what we did previously, we categorized these results in a 1 through 5 ranking system. We found that roadways, though there was input from the community regarding its importance, had a lower priority than some of these other topics. Maintenance was an important factor, but was exceeded by the desire to improve the park amenities. So rankings 2 and 3 included the park amenities that were most important and those that were more secondary. And lastly, safety was a primary concern voiced by the community. So any element with a very low condition ranking was determined to be ranked number 1 as a community priority. Next slide. So now we are moving on from our priority ranking categories, and we'll talk about our 2 supplemental categories. So these categories won't impact the ranking number that the park receives, but they still present valuable information as the city considers how to determine a park's need for improvement. So for an asset lifespan, we provided a number of years of useful lifespan remaining for each park asset. And we did this by researching what the total lifespan of a typical amenity would be. Whether it's play equipment or park furnishings or an irrigation system, we then consider the condition ranking it received in order to calculate an approximate number of years that the asset would still be useful for the park. Next slide. So we also developed an approximate lifespan for each amenity as well as the overall park. So the amenity lifespan is determined by taking the average lifespan of all its assets. And similarly, the park lifespan is determined by taking the average lifespan of all the amenities. Next slide. So our final category here provides an estimated cost for replacing an amenity at a park. So this is a very high level estimate because we recognize there are so many different types of improvements that can be considered, but it does provide the city with a number that they can use on a planning level. So our process to generate a cost estimate for each amenity at each park throughout the city is first by collecting the size of each amenity using the city's existing GIS database. So this GIS database that the city provided proved to be really valuable in being able to pull approximate square footage of various amenities for each of the parks. Next slide. We then developed an estimated unit cost per square foot for each amenity. So depending on the type of amenity, whether it be landscape or playground or a soccer field, we used recent bid results gathered from past projects in order to approximate a unit cost. We then considered soft costs such as design fees and city administration fees to produce a final unit cost for all the efforts required to replace an amenity. Next slide. So to wrap up all that information, I do want to share with you an example of all these different categories that we're using to rank the park applied to an actual park in Santa Rosa. So the park, the example park we'll be reviewing today is Doyle Park. So Doyle Park is a community park. It's located in the northeast quadrant of the city, and it's approximately 18 acres in size and just has a multitude of amenities. Next slide. So this is an example snapshot of the matrix that we will be developing for each park. On the left-hand column is the list of amenities that the park has. This example isn't actually showing all the amenities at Doyle Park. The top row is all the different categories that we'll be providing information about. So you'll notice that each of the priority ranking categories in the first row has a percentage to it. 80%, 10%, 5%, 5%. And this represents the weighted value that it will contribute to its overall priority rank. So the condition ranking you can see has the highest weight value, and it's really the most impactful in contributing to the overall priority rank for the park. Doyle Park, we can see received a condition rank of 3.4, which is pretty moderate in condition. Its ADA rank is 1.6, which shows there are quite a few accessibility deficiencies across the site. A rank 1 under revenue generation shows it has a very high revenue, which tells us that it's being very frequently used. 3.2 in community priorities shows it's a moderate priority based on community input. Its approximate lifespan is about 16 and a half years, and the total cost of replacing the entire park is approximated to be 14 million. So I hope this gives you a picture of the type of information we'll be providing as we continue to develop the ranking for the rest of the parks. Next slide. So our next steps in the project will be to finalize the ranking of the remaining sites. We also want to humanize the data based on the results of our ranking. So the report not only has a spreadsheet of numbers, but also provides an analysis of our findings. We'll be reviewing with city staff and then proceeding with developing the draft report. We'll then be coming back to the board to present the report and then approaching council for approval. Next slide. So that's it for the presentation portion. Thank you so much for listening to the overview of the project. We're really looking forward to hearing your input and feedback on the project. Thank you.
Thanks, Grant. I usually keep my comments for last as the chair, but there are a couple of overwhelming comments that I'm just going to put out there. The Measure M that you referred to, the Board of Community Services was the overseeing board that held hands with this throughout its entire span. So we're very familiar with the community's input. We were active participants. I kind of get the feeling that your company's not a Santa Rosa based company. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, we have offices in San Jose and Burlingame.
So you've been visiting the parks in Santa Rosa, which also lends to the third party perspective, which is a good thing.
Correct.
Correct? Have you done very many reviews of this nature for other city park systems?
So Brian can chime in on this as well. We've done condition assessments in the past, but as I mentioned before, the lens that we're looking at the parks through this report is pretty unique in itself. And I don't think there's a lot of precedents even found throughout other cities across California that are really one-to-one in comparing to how we're evaluating the park system in Santa Rosa here.
Okay, and my last question is for staff. At some point, I would really like Jen. I don't know if James Santos or someone from the park maintenance end is with us, but your feedback, because a lot of very technical, I'm not a city employee. I don't know what truncated is. I don't know what GIS is. I assume Jen does. You presented information above my pay grade. So I'm very interested in how useful staff finds the information you're gathering. And you have completed the gathering of the information. Now you're going to process, or you're still gathering information?
Correct. We've went out to all the sites and collected all this data, and now we're processing it.
So you have finished your observation, and now you're entering the assessment phase.
Yep, correct.
Okay, those are my initial questions. I'm going to open it up to board members. Raise virtual or real hands, please.
You are muted, Carol. I don't think.
I'm sorry, Steve.
Yes, thank you. Grant, prior to this meeting, all of the board members thoroughly reviewed the wealth of data that you all gathered and converted into quite meaningful information. Thank you so very much, and thank the staff for the tremendous amount of work you've done, especially for something that's, as Grant mentioned, is unique. I do have a question about the categories, the priority rankings. You have 6 major categories, or 4 major and 2 supplementals. I was wondering about other possible categories, such as does each one of these parks help the city reach its goals, such as that is outlined in the city's strategic plan, namely the general plan? So I thought that might be worth hearing from other board members. Does each park help us reach those goals? And another category might be, does each park contribute to the health and welfare of the citizens, such as the physical, emotional, mental health of the citizens that use those parks? Is it too late to consider other categories? Or do those 2 new possible categories have merit? Or your thoughts, please?
I think I'll start off with this, and, Grant or Brian or Emily, if you have anything else. So one of the things that we started doing when we started this process with Calendar and Associates was thinking about all these categories. And we started going down the rabbit hole of just a bazillion different categories. And so we kept coming back to the fact that what we've asked Calendar for is really a condition assessment. It's going to be one of our tools that we use as we decide how to move forward, as we have different funding sources, what's important to us, and how do we move forward with this project. But what we simply don't have is that, what is the what is the ranking just based on its, general condition? As Emily mentioned in the beginning, we have a pretty good understanding, but you can also call us, very subjective because we're working within the system. So those things are something we would absolutely be taking into consideration once calendar has finished their process, and we start taking the next steps to engage with the community about what are our priorities, not only based on the condition assessment, but based on all these other factors that we have, they're outside of their scope of services. So super important, and we will be definitely moving on with that information once they've wrapped up, if that's helpful. And I don't know if any of you from the team have anything else to add to that, can help explain, but.
Yeah, I can chime in here. I think the other thing that we wanted to do was make sure that this report was very objective, and took a look at categories that we could really quantify, and define what the rationale was for the evaluation. You start to get into some of these other categories, they begin to get a little bit more subjective. And I think that's where Jen's saying is that we're going to take this objective information and then continue to refine it through additional lenses and discussions with city staff as these projects move forward. And that's maybe when some of these more, subjective lenses can come in.
Right.
So the city's goals are quite specific and not subjective as they are outlined in the general plan.
Board Member Spillman will be returning to the community and be having that conversation with the community members about not only this condition assessment, but the council goals, the priorities of each of the community members as they see it, and from the Measure M. The Measure M outreach, which you all have been so engrossed in, has really helped inform us where to prioritize some of that information thus far. And then this report will add to that as we return to the community in February and March to gain more input from the community on where their priorities lie. But certainly your point is well taken to take a look at that.
Okay, then one other thing would be, I see that your next step is to visit all of the sites. I'm assuming that means the parks. When you plan on visiting the parks in District 3, I would like to tag along. So if you could let me know the time and dates for those visiting those various parks, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, apologies. I did mention in the presentation that we're in the middle of that step. So we've actually already visited all the parks. We've made our site investigations, and right now we're performing the ranking and processing the data of the observations that we made. So the visits have been completed.
So process step number 5, visit all sites, has already been taken care of.
Yeah, we're in the middle of that step. Yeah, so we visited the parks, but we haven't performed the ranking and processed the data.
So have you visited all of the parks?
Yes, all the parks have been visited.
You
Yes.
do not plan on revisiting any of the parks?
At this point, we do not.
I think that would have been helpful to know prior to your visits. That's all I have. Thank you.
I think that's an important clarification. I found that a little bit confusing as well, Steve. For just everybody's clarification, Jen, Kala, is it pronounced Kala or Kayla? Excuse me.
Sorry for the confusion. We go by, the long name is Calendar Associates Landscape Architects. Shorten it, we go by Kala.
So Kala, I am not trying to slight you in any way. Kala is providing a tool. Kala is providing information. Kala is not directing the city project. Kala is providing information, and city staff and this board and the community will be deciding how to implement the data that's being gathered. They're just providing a tool. They're providing perhaps suggested direction, but I'm sure Kala is made up of wonderful people they ain't in charge, we are. Is that correct?
That is correct. As you know, we make recommendations or whatever, bring information to the board, but the board is the one that is making recommendations to council, and council's making decisions, especially when it comes to funding. So council will be the ultimate deciding factor on how to move forward. They did accept the board's recommendation for 50% of the Measure M funds to be spent towards capital improvement projects, 40% on maintenance enhancements, and 10% on recreational enhancements as well. So we'll definitely be circling back. This is just one step in our process, and a very long process with the community.
Thank you for that. Sorry to leave your hand up for so long, Logan. You can bring it down now, and the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you, Grant and Brian, for your time. One comment first. I think this is a really important process. So I'm really glad that the city's embarking on it. I think that this transparency establishes accountability, and that's how we build trust. And we're really lucky that the citizens, the voters, trusted us enough to tax themselves to, maintain the park. So we want to keep that level of trust. And so again, I think this is a really important part of that. Some questions, and maybe one comment too. I love Doyle Park. Maybe it's my favorite park, but I think a better known park in Santa Rosa would be Howarth Park. It's probably our highest used park, if I remember the numbers. And I think for the general public, for all residents of the Doyle Park is well used, but there's probably people that have never been there. And I think most residents of Santa Rosa would be universally familiar with Howarth Park. That's probably a subjective comment, but that would be my guess. So that might be more helpful just to explain to like the average person. And then on those user numbers, so can you explain that a little bit more, what revenue generation represents?
Yes, absolutely. So revenue generation, we got data from the city from 2019 on how much revenue each park and each park amenity generated. So we're using this data, and it's a subset of numbers that we're able to contribute to the priority rank of the park. But we just want to emphasize that the revenue generation category isn't focused on how much money. That's not where the value of this category comes from. It's really the amount of revenue it generates is basically a representation of that we're using to see how much this park is used, how frequently it's being used, how popular it is, how many programs are being ran out of that park. So it gives us a picture of those items, and that's what we see that has value that we think should be contributing to the rank of the park.
And are you going to be measuring usage in any other way?
So we are not. We don't have a separate effort to measure usage, which is one of the reasons why we're using revenue generation to reflect this.
Yeah, and I guess this question for Jen, how do we measure that, Jen? Daily or annual usage?
Right. So I was just going to chime in. One of the reasons that Calendar and Associates is using this data is because we don't have a data set of use. We have, staff understand, people who live in the city understand where the uses are generally, but we really don't have objective data. So one of the things we looked at as staff members between recreation and parks and maintenance, et cetera, was we know that the places where we have programming, where we have youth camps and things like that, where people are putting in extra funds towards these, we have a higher level of use at those parks. And certainly that puts Howarth Park into a very large ranking because of that. So that's one of the reasons we're relying on that. It's not necessarily that it's making money, it's just that we know that's a higher level of use at those parks. So we're using that in lieu of any real data set. And in order to collect that data set, we would be coming to you next year. We really need to move forward so that we can start to see a difference in the community with the Measure M funds rather than continue to evaluate. So that's what.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to spend the money. And anyways, that could be a long-term project. There's a more accurate gauge of the users. Maybe volunteers or someone could help with that. And then, so just a critique, the term revenue generation is confusing because that's where, because you just had to explain to me what it meant. And I think the average person is going to assume that it's just about how much money it makes. So maybe just even in the title, it could be number of users as revenue or something like that, that just points more towards the user part of it than the financial part. And then just this is one technical question, this is my last one. How does that point scale work? Is that a 50-point scale or 5-point? And then is that what's going to go to this final report and like the average? So I'm just really thinking more to the average end user, the average resident. Are they going to pick up something and say, oh, Doyle Park's a 3.1?
Right. So Yep, the point scale for the overall parks is also based on this 1 through 5. So the overall priority rank for Doyle would be 3.1. It's out of 5, and 1 is actually the highest priority. 5 is the lowest, and we'll evaluate that a little bit more in the report and be able to talk about how that point scale works. But essentially, you'll be able to compare each park to one another based on this point scale from 1 through 5. So a park with a rank of 1 would be high priority, and then 5 would be the lowest priority.
Okay, then what is the 0.1 about then? I don't understand that part. It was 3.1 for Doyle Park.
That's right. Okay. So we did use 1 decimal point for each priority rank, just because as we calculated this priority rank, 3.1 is calculated from the ranking of all these 4 categories: condition, ADA, revenue, and community.
And they're weighted certain ways, right?
Exactly.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Again, back to accessibility. I mean, I know a letter grade is probably a more rough, just something that people can have a better sense of what 3.1 means. And if that's going to be it, I think that's fine. Just kind of an explainer to the average person, how you got that. And otherwise, thank you. That's it for me, Carol.
Thank you. Terry, I'm going to butt in again. This assessment, this report, will it be for public consumption? This document that you're producing?
And so I'll just jump in there. Absolutely. This is for everyone in the city. It's citizens as well as internal staff, council members, board members, whoever would like to use this report. We had something very similar done in the city for all of its buildings, the facility assessment, which is really helpful to understand. Again, it's a component of how the city understands where its issues are and where its needs are for moving forward. So it's a tool to use, and it will definitely be that way for this. So we appreciate any feedback where we can, as the subject matter experts, we know we bury ourselves in details. So any way where we can refine this and better explain to our citizens, we're happy to hear how we can do it better.
So I do not find the terminology particularly pedestrian friendly. And as far as revenue generating, what I'm assuming that means is sports fields that get permitted and rented out. I don't know how we, aside from the carousel ride and camps, we're talking about soccer fields, football fields, tennis courts that are rented out, and pickleball courts that are logged for private use. These are the revenue generators, correct?
Right.
If a league gets a soccer field, they're paying for its use.
Right. And I'll maybe Jeff can elaborate a little bit more on some of those programs.
Yeah, that's a piece of it. I mean, obviously revenue doesn't represent all uses, but there's more variety than that in terms of use. Recreation programs taking place. So, Camp Uchi out at Youth Park is going to come in as Youth Park revenue. Camp Doyle is part of the reason that Doyle has a high number of revenue. So there's also the city's recreational programs, our softball programs, the adult softball that we run, those types of things. And then also you have park permit revenue, which is larger events that take place in parks. Juilliard has quite a bit of revenue from park permits because it's a pretty popular spot for some of those larger events. And then picnic reservations, which are generally smaller family gatherings and those types of things at picnic sites. So again, a lot of people use the parks completely for free, but it does give a pretty good variation of city programs, smaller events, larger events, sports events. So it's, again, not having a better tool, it's a pretty good reflective tool of a multitude of uses of our parks.
As you are writing out this public consumption report, to highlight some of those things, let's say the classic car show at Juilliard, people can picture both the event and the park, as opposed to just a category head, and all I could see was soccer and baseball. So that shows you how limited. I think the general public would get more use out of that. Sorry for interrupting again, Terry.
No worries, thank you. So just a question that's somewhat in the weeds, so to speak. In terms of assessing landscaping condition, are you just looking at the condition of the plants and trees? Are you looking at invasive species? Are you looking at weeds? What exactly are you using to assess landscape condition? Drought tolerant, so forth?
Yeah, all of those we're taking into consideration. We are mostly looking at through a lens of the condition of the landscape rather than maybe particularly the selection of species that may have been installed or proposed for that area. So we take into consideration the amount of dieback that we see or the amount of weeds that are in and around the landscape. And we've created a set of criteria in order to determine, what number category it falls in terms of being a really healthy condition with no weeds and flourishing landscapes, or a lot of dieback, a lot of weeds, and so forth.
Okay, because as I'm sure you know, invasive species could look pretty and be in great condition, but it's still an invasive species, requires a lot of maintenance and work and may be rated differently on that basis. And then I'm having a hard time, and maybe it's just me, understanding the community priority ranking and how that factors into the Doyle Park example that you gave. Can you go over that one more time?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that up. Community priorities is one of the rankings that we are actually still refining. And one of the reasons is because we had updated information about the final results of the surveys. So we are still honing in on how to define the description of each category from rank 1 through 5. But essentially, we're looking at the results of the Measure M survey and looking at the specific amenities that we see that the community voted for or had priority over compared to others. So there was survey questions regarding the specific types of amenities and improvements that the community would like to see in the park system, and we were able to compare that with others. So when we're looking at Doyle Park, for example, if one of the high priority amenities that the community has shared is playgrounds, then the playground category, because Doyle Park does have some playground amenities, would be ranked as a higher priority in the community's perspective. Does that kind of give you a picture? We are still developing it, so it's not completely refined, but that's how we're using that data.
Okay, yeah, because I wasn't sure if for example, if the general furnishings rated as a 2 corresponded to the 2 and the ranking criteria that are primary amenities. You know what I mean? I wasn't sure if that was the connection, or if there was, if it was giving a different weight to general furnishings independent of the 1 through 5 ranking that you have.
Yeah, and you're absolutely spot on that. I've actually updated the ranking criteria that we see on the slide, the 1 through 5, based on the updated information that we received very recently. But the actual matrix hasn't been. So there is a discrepancy. So
okay, great.
Yeah,
right.
You caught that one.
Okay, good. Glad it wasn't just me. So yeah, if we could, before we present this to the public, it'd be good to have that kind of pinned down.
Absolutely.
That's all my questions. Thank you so much for the presentation and for your work.
Thank you for that. Could we put I'll get you in just a second, Guido. Could we go back to the Doyle Park visual? Great. When you were making these assessments, I hear you saying that the priorities that you got from Measure M helped with the weighting. Did you take the raw data and make your own interpretations of the priorities from Measure M, or did you consult staff and they told you, as Jen just went over, it was 50% improvements, 40%, Jen, help me out here, 40% maintenance and 10% recreation? Did staff provide guidance for how the Measure M equation was playing in?
We provided the public input report that the board received in the October meeting, although the finalized version of that. And so that had all of the results summarized in that very first combined results piece of that report. And so they pulled information from there.
So does that mean they were given the 50%, 40%, 10% split information, or they were given information before that was sent forward to City Council?
I think that I shared that information, but that is a higher level, like at a funding level rather than the community. I know those are community priorities are related to the funding, but the information that we collected from the community was much more granular than that. And so they're using a lower level of information there. But it is incorporated. So like number 4 is maintenance, because maintenance fell below improving the amenities within the parks. So improved amenities are incorporated within the secondary, within number 3 and number 2, secondary amenities and primary amenities. And then the overall number 1, safety, is in general the most important priority, and that comes from question 8, I believe, of the all the results that we received.
I would like staff to review the public input for Measure M and make sure that CALA's interpretation of it is the same station as staff's is. We spent an awful lot of time as a community trying to gather this information, and I would certainly hope that it would be a directing agent rather than something that you were reinterpreting. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we can revisit. Yeah, we were pulling data more directly from the specific questions asked and some of the results of the community's response to some of those specific questions. But it's definitely a topic that we are working on still right now, but we can revisit, especially with the whole city staff team, to make sure that we're interpreting that correctly.
I personally, I would really appreciate that. Again, I apologize for interrupting. Comments and questions from the board? And we can leave the slide now so I can see hands that might be raised. Thank you. Excuse me, Guido, you have the floor.
Thank you. You can hear me okay? Being this is my first time doing this. Can you hear me? Okay, good. When I was in Petaluma, living there growing up there, I ended up on the Petaluma Parks and Recreation Commission, served there for almost 10 years. And I love working and generating parks that we were building, the community was building, and we built parks, and we want a lot of sports activities and so forth. And Grant, I was really impressed by your presentation. But one thing that I haven't heard, and maybe Jen can tell me where I can find this information, is I go by Southwest Community Park 4 or 5 times a day, and that place is packed with families and mostly Hispanics. I mean, I love the way they take their kids out when they get home, and they go out and they play in the park before they go home and eat and so on. And I want to know what the rating is on that park, if you have that, Grant.
And I'll chime in here, Grant, you can follow up it, and we're getting there. Board member, can you mute real quick?
And I'm saying this because I live in the Roseland area, right off of Hearn Avenue. So, like I say, I'm so thrilled every time I go by it. And it's packed.
Yes, yes. We're just getting a little bit of revert. There you go with the. So absolutely, we know from the amount of picnic rentals, et cetera, at Southwest that it's one of our higher. It's going to be higher ranked as far as the usage at Southwest. What the team is showing you tonight is just Doyle, so that we could just show you one example rather than running through a smattering of things. However, on a staff level, we've run through several parks just to test how it works. And it definitely, the prioritization that they've come up with is definitely working. We need a little bit more refinement, but it's working really well. And so Southwest will rank really, I'm sure it will rank very high as far as the types of programs and uses out there. We'll have to see how it comes out with the rest, but we know it needs a lot of love. So I'm sure it's going to rank accordingly when we bring that back. But Grant or Brian or Emily, any additional comments?
Jen, Jen, could you run through who all from the city staff is involved? I saw all the names off to the side on the first slide, but couldn't read them. And not only their names, but who they are for the roles they fill in the city, so that we really have a feel for our people who are actively involved in this process.
So team members are from park planning, myself and Jen and Terry Bladow, who is our research and program coordinator. And then from our park maintenance team, we have Jeremy Gundy, who's the deputy director of field services, as well as James Castro, who's the parks maintenance superintendent, and Tim Finnegan and Elio Toronto, who are both our parks crew supervisors. And then from recreation, we have Amy Rockowitz, as a recreation supervisor, and Jeff Tibbetts, who you all know. And then also from facilities planning, her focus often being on ADA compliance is Cameron McDonald.
So this is a good blend of both boots on the ground staff and more administrative. And these people are meet and interact on a regular basis across the board to discuss this, correct?
That is correct.
That gives me a lot of confidence. Thank you.
We've met 6 times as a group.
Again, back to the board. Any more questions or comments before we open it up to public weighing in? Seeing none, do we have any public comments for this item?
We do. Annette, I'm going to unmute you. Oh, sorry, where you went?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hello, thank you. I think it's really wonderful how these rankings are happening, because it does give it an outside view. I would like to ask, though, how are we addressing equity in this, as far as trying to help historically underserved neighborhoods come up to par? That's all. Thank you.
Do we have any other public comments?
No, we do not have any more.
So I want to assure Annette that equity in the parks has been a priority of this board. And every time we have looked at Measure M data, that is one of the primary measuring sticks that many of us insist on applying. And hopefully we will continue to do that with equal diligence. Jen, can you give us some guidance on where we're going with this item now and what our time frame is?
Sure. So Emily may and the team may chime in for some of the details, but the big picture is that we're going to take this condition assessment and roll it back out to our community members. We're hopeful in February/March to get this information out and ask again another series of questions for prioritizing projects, not only based on their condition, but based on their quadrant location and other factors that we're going to start to develop. So we're going to use this for that purpose. Meanwhile, we are also going to go back to council for approval of the condition assessment. I'm sorry, we're going to come back to the board for the final approval and then back to council. And meanwhile, we'll be developing these outreach meetings for the community to chime in on really where they want to see their dollars spent, especially with the capital projects, because we're ready to move forward with prioritizing those capital projects. And so this is all going to be happening very close to each other. But that's the plan. That's a long-term plan. And then staff and the citizens can use this document into the future as we need it, because we also have other funding sources that this report could rely on in the future as well. So it's a really fantastic tool the city has needed for such a long time. So, and I'll turn it back to Emily and Grant and Brian if you have any details about some of the schedule.
You did a good job.
Okay.
Next big steps.
Will Cala be creating the finished document, or will city staff?
Calla is working on the final report.
In thinking back about the aging, the maturing of the Measure M presentations, they definitely morphed from one presentation to the next with more graphics being presented, more tangible information that average citizens could wrap their heads around. There's not a lot of tangible information or visuals in this presentation that I, for one, as a resident of Santa Rosa, could wrap my head around. I would become a living Santa Rosa park document with real parks, things that people can identify with, rather than it's a little high level right now. Grant, you do this for a living. The people who you're communicating with, we don't. And I would really like to see that as an overarching lens that you look through. I don't know if anyone else on the committee was a bit, Logan, I know you're in government, you probably understood a lot of this, but it was definitely above my pay grade. And I want people to be able to consume and appreciate this without saying, I shouldn't be in this advanced class. How do I drop?
That is very helpful feedback, Carol. And if you have thoughts, if the board has thoughts also about a title for the report that's more accessible, I'd love to hear that too.
Yeah, we absolutely hear you and all the board members very clear and loudly. And if you remember, one of our slides showed the next steps. One of those steps is humanizing this information. We are kind of deep in the weeds of data collection and trying to quantify and put numbers to these things. We do understand and hear you loud and clear that we absolutely need to present this in a way that the community can really understand. So we hope to prove that to you the next time we bring it to you.
Just
Logan?
a thought there, if I could, Carol. I think you could keep it really simple and just call it the Santa Rosa Parks Report. Something basic like that. I think that would, it's pretty clear that's what it is. The jargon and longer syllables tends to throw people off. So there's a pitch for you. How long do you need from us to make up better titles? If you're asking that seriously, are you doing that soon, or can we come back next month with that?
Oh, yeah. Is that another, I'd say 3 months?
Okay. I'll get creative.
Great.
I personally would like to see the more personalized report to help us come up with a more personalized title. I think it's more than just a parks report. But I could use some more local angles to it to come up with a more local title.
Another thought, sorry, Carol, sorry, I had to pause there. Maybe make a kids version of this. I don't know, that's why that's popped in my head, but some sort of super basic version. And maybe this could be something we could do in like a rec program down the road, like a coloring book or something like that. I don't know.
Park assessments report for dummies. I don't know if anyone ever had a Volkswagen, but there was a very technical how to repair your Volkswagen book back in the 70s that was called For Dummies. So Jen, what do you need from us?
Well, I'm going to turn it back to the team to see if you've received enough feedback. I mean, certainly from my perspective, we have received quite a bit and it's fantastic. So I'll turn it back to the team to see if they need anything else.
That is exactly what we've needed is your thoughts and vet it and beat it up. And, you know, we've got a list of items that we're going to be continuing to refine this. And like I said, we're going to bring a draft report to you and hope that you see that we've addressed your comments.
So board members, we have a couple more things to do, but is there anything that you're going to be kicking yourself for not having asked? And Madonna, I'm going to ask you, do you think we need this document in Spanish? Do you think we need the whole document in Spanish? Do you think we need an abridged document in Spanish?
I definitely wanted to just chime in with the accessibility for persons with disabilities. That's very important to me. Having disabilities, I'm not using a wheelchair per se, but having others. And then yes, the signage, like our new board member said, at the Southwest Park, you know, it's a lot of brown skin there, right? Which is amazing. So yes, I would love to have it in Spanish for the ones who do speak Spanish. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so you've got your walk-in orders. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So we're going to move on now with the last little bit of our regular or regular meeting with, I have to find myself, committee reports. The mayor's lunch was actually today, and it was well attended. One thing I wanted to mention was both the new piece of artwork at the courthouse square is moving forward, and also the Ruth Asawa fountain, which was taken down during the unification, is not only going to be reinstalled, but it's finally going to be cast in metal. I think it's bronze. It was originally supposed to be cast in bronze. Back in the day, we couldn't afford it, so we put the mold up. But PG&E money has been put aside, so when the Ruth Asawa fountain goes back up, it's going to be the real deal, which is pretty cool. There was no Waterways Committee in the last month, but there's one scheduled for later in the month. With that, we move on to written and electronic communications. Jen Santos.
Thank you, Chair. So in your agenda packets, we have our Zest newsletter, exciting. And we also received some correspondence between November 22nd and November 29th regarding the board's decision to double line the pickleball courts or the tennis courts at Finley. And you received about 9 emails, and they're part of the agenda packet as well. And that's it.
Thank you, Jen. Future agenda items. Before we move to that, I want to apologize for stating that our newest board member, Guido Baccadoloni, was appointed by Victoria Fleming. He was not. I think I was confusing my Rogers, and in fear of listing the wrong Rogers, I just didn't list a Rogers at all. Guido has joined us as the appointee of Natalie Rogers. And not only is he an appointee, but he also lives in that district. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's Boccaglione.
Boccaglione.
There you go.
Boccaglione. So Guido, I want to apologize for not affording you the opportunity to introduce yourself to us. And if it would be all right with you, I'm going to ask if we can wait until the new year for that, when hopefully we'll have a full board and we can all spend a couple of minutes just saying a bit about all of us so that you get a flavor for who we are and we get a flavor for who you are. Would that work for you?
That's fine. The new year, I'll be a new man.
Does that work for the rest of you? So again, Guido, if you could mute yourself. Thank you. Ideas or concerns for future agenda items. Jen, are we on the light side for our current January agenda where we could take some new topics, or are we pretty booked up for January?
I'm going to have to check, but I think we do have only one item coming forward in January. So we're still developing the agenda between all the staff members and Rec and Parks that are working on it. So we're working on it. But right now, there's only one item.
Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No problem.
Future agenda items.
I'm going to be pestering her.
So Guido, I'm going to go to Terry first.
I'm pretty close to where she works, so I'm going to be over there.
Have a future agenda item that you wanted to put on the table?
Well, I've got a few. I'm going to talk to her. Maybe some of them are already being worked on because I'm new and I don't know what you people have been working on. But I'm going to go over when Jen has time and get some information, and then next meeting I'll probably have a dozen questions.
Good enough. Guido, if you could mute yourself now. Thank you. Terry?
Thank you. This item doesn't need to come to us in January, but if it could come to us sometime, maybe in the first quarter of next year. I had the opportunity to watch the Charter Review Committee meeting last Wednesday, and Socorro Shields did a presentation on diversity, equity, and inclusion for that board or for that committee in terms of the lens they will use to look at their work and what should go on the ballot for the city's charter. And I thought the presentation was excellent. I learned a lot, and I thought it would be great if she, time permitting, could give us that same presentation to this board.
I'll jump in because I'm on charter review, and that was a great presentation, Terry. I don't know that that'll end up in the charter, and that's not just up to me. That's one, I think some folks have talked about maybe that should be, or at least an ordinance, that it'll be some sort of required training. So anyways, that might be coming sometime next year. I definitely think it should, but I don't think we should wait for that. So I would totally support us doing that as soon as possible.
I'll reach out to our team and see what their availability is, and we'll get them in the schedule.
And let me just say one thing. They are still developing it. We were the first committee to get it, and it wasn't quite done yet. But they still did a great job. So they're working on it.
Madonna, you're muted. Anyone else, future agenda items? So I know that this is probably slated on one of the monthly calendars already, but if we could have a review of the current parks which are started but not completed. I'm not asking for an in-depth assessment of Kiwanis Springs, Southwest Community, but an overview just of where we are, especially so that people who live near those parks know that they have not been forgotten. But that would be lovely to have that, and also to slot some time for some introductions. I will again make the pitch for, I can't wait for all of us to be on Rosie the trolley and going and visiting our parks in real life. I have my fingers crossed for 2022. One more thing, and that is Fremont Park, which is a very historic downtown park. It's going to have its first meeting in a week and a half or so. I, for one, plan on attending virtually. Jen reminds us that if we have more than 3 members show up, is that correct? Is it 3 or 4?
It's more than 3.
If we have more than 3 show up, it would be a violation of the Brown Act, but there will be several opportunities. I hope we can all weigh in, or at least see the presentation, and go pick up your binders at Finley Center. And with that, unless there's anything else, I am going to adjourn this meeting of the Board of Community Services. We will be back here on Wednesday, the 26th of January. And at 6:04, I say, welcome, Guido. It's been great. Thank you all for your participation. Have a wonderful holiday. Bye now.